Uh, by way of introduction for the whole topic, Vajrayana is an extraordinarily beautiful and fascinating system of systems. It has enormous complexity, and at the same time, there is a fundamental logic to the whole thing, such that everything makes sense when you have the framework, and then every little detail fits into the framework, and everything implies everything else so that it is overall coherent and consistent. At the same time, it is a horrendous mess of conceptual confusions, of contradictions, of things that make absolutely no sense. And this is because, well, two things. One is that it has accreted in these layers, a stack of 9 of them or more, if you want to subdivide, over a period of 1,400 years of people continuously innovating and addressing new social, cultural, religious circumstances with new doctrines, with new practices that are actually different from the previous ones. That's one reason the thing is kind of a mess. And in particular, because those tend to get blurred. It makes a lot more sense if you're really clear about where a particular thing is coming in the stack. The other thing is we have to acknowledge that this is a human creation, that there were a lot of brilliant people who were highly inspired and insightful and did their best. And they were people and they got things wrong. And a lot of it just doesn't make sense. And also, it was all worked out in social, cultural, and religious contexts, which are not ours. And so a lot of it isn't relevant as originally taught to actually anybody's circumstances, even those of contemporary Tibetans. So we need to approach Vajrayana with a combination of reverence and devotion for how amazing and beautiful it is, along with a kind of reasonable skepticism and curious inquiry, but not taking anything for granted just because it's holy. When somebody says something that seems wrong about Tibetan Buddhism, it may be because they are speaking from a different subsystem within Tibetan Buddhism. There are a series of what are called 9 yanas, which are complete self-contained systems within Tibetan Buddhism, each of which has its own logic, its own principles and functions, and it makes sense on its own. And each of these yanas contradicts all the others. They actually have quite different views on things. And then the whole stack is addressed meta-systematically, meaning you can stand outside the stack and see the whole thing and see how at a meta level it's not contradictory, because each of the yanas, the layers, is functional for a particular purpose, for a particular set of circumstances. And so that one is correct from point of view of where you are and what you want to do. I'd say particularly that most teachers, I mean, any competent teacher of Tibetan Buddhism is familiar with the whole stack, could speak from any of these layers, but typically they speak from 1 or 2 layers primarily, particularly for a given audience. If you have a personal teacher, this is very important. The role of a personal teacher in Vajrayana is critical. If you have a personal teacher and they say something that is different than what I say, you should definitely prioritize what they say, even if I were correct and they were wrong, which is very unlikely. But if that were to happen, your relationship with your teacher is much more important than any point of doctrine.